There are some Quislings who, from the start, were clearly dreadful human beings. Bronislaw Kamiński, Vidkun Quisling, Anton Musert. There are some Quislings who started out with some good motivations, but lost their way, like Andrei Vlasov or Wang Jingwei. And there are some Quislings who are just so weak, and less allied with the enemy for ideological reasons than simply due to their weak, non-existent characters. People who make you feel like a kind of bland, sterile disgust, as if you stepped in a musty old drawing room, or a rotten Masonic hall, and have to look around at crusty old ruins. And the name of this crusty old Quisling was Emil Hácha, carved out of some of the weakest stuff in history. Emil Hácha was born in Trochowy-Swiny in 1872 to tax official Joseph Hácha and his wife Marie Klosova. And far from being the nonchalant non-entity he later became, he was clearly energetic and intelligent from a young age, so great at educating himself that he was actually allowed to start school in second grade. In 1896, he graduated with honours from the Czech Charles Ferdinand University in Prague as a lawyer, and in 1898 joined the Czech government. As well as picking up multiple languages, he was a hiker, mountaineer, skier, liked cigars, and had at least some energy to his character. Which seemed to go downhill, as Hácha pushed into his stuffy backroom lawyer era, and maybe because he was so exhausted. Councillor of the Administrative Court in Vienna, member of the Supreme Administrative Court when Czechoslovakia was founded, professor at the Faculty of Law of the Charles University, builder of the Czechoslovak Constitution. It seemed, for all intents and purposes, as if Hácha had been a devoted servant, first of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then of the newly created Czechoslovak state. But contrary to that, and contrary to those who claim he was always a patriot, Hácha had certain cultural and ethno-supremacist attitudes towards Slovaks, most of which had been forced into the Union. The head of his own office noted Hácha was opposed to the idea of Czechs and Slovaks in the same state, because he believed that Slovaks were culturally, quote, less advanced, ethnically different, not sure how the hell that matters, and with what he carefully phrased as a completely different historical development. But in spite of this, Hácha professed loyalty to Czechoslovakia in public. This showed a certain passive but toxic opportunism, which, should his career continue along the path it seemed to be progressing on, shouldn't be much of a problem. Until it was, because although Hácha's career didn't seem to be going along the path of high politics, go there it did, somehow. In 1938, his wife Marie died, which devastated him greatly. His daughter Milada then divorced, creating great emotional pain. Hácha began to tell people he was exhausted, and looked forward to an early retirement. But that retirement never came, because in 1938, the Allies forced Czechoslovakia into the Munich Agreement, which essentially forced them to give up the Sudetenland, their most defensible, strong territory, to Germany. This the Czech army and government did, without firing a shot, to the disgust of many people. President Beneš, who had essentially sold part of his country, left, and a new president was sought out. Rudolf Beran, chairman of the National Unity Party, proposed Hácha. Prime Minister General Sivori liked the idea, they called in Hácha to take over, and he refused. Only after further talks did Hácha agree, and the man who didn't even believe in the concept of the state took over, a man who was now expected to defend a country against the Nazis. They needed a man who could stand strong, be ruthlessly militarily efficient, endlessly confrontational, and they chose Hácha, a stuffy, washed-up old lawyer who didn't even believe in the cause, partly because he said to his advisor, "Do you know what is being planned for me? They want me to be the administrator of the bankruptcy estate." And administrator he was, and oversee the bankruptcy he did, because what happened next was entirely his own fault. As I said before, when Hácha took power, what Czechoslovakia needed was a ruthless leader who could keep everything afloat. A man was needed who could ruthlessly centralise, force the separatists to comply, not kowtow to outside powers. And what did they do but choose a Hácha whose first move was to allow autonomy for Slovakia, transform Czechoslovakia into a federal state, put in place anti-Semitic laws to appease Germany, begin the march toward fascism, and do jack shit for the army. In fact, he didn't even arrest Joseph Tiso, the Slovak leader who was secretly negotiating with Germany, despite knowing what he was doing, until March 10th. And then when German-sponsored riots broke out, Hácha didn't order the army to shoot them, or even suppress them properly. Instead, off he went for a meeting with Hitler. It was maybe not a good idea for Hácha's own government to suggest a weak-willed, politically ambiguous, exhausted old man with a heart condition go and negotiate with a middle-aged, methed-up, fascist man in his prime, and this was the prime example. Hitler kept him waiting for several hours while he watched a movie, Then, when he did see him, launched into a huge rant about the evil Czech offences and terrible intentions toward Germany. Then he said bluntly, the Czech lands would be occupied by Germany at 6 AM and Prague would be bombed and Czechoslovakia flattened, unless there was compliance. Despite having multiple anti-tank weapons, despite having an army, despite death being better than disgrace, despite having one of the biggest arms industries, Hácha, who, pathetically, was kept alive by German injections, signed his country away, without a shot being fired, and then not only did that, but called up his army, and told them to mount no resistance. Blatantly having done it because he was too much of a wimp to confront Hitler, Hácha then started breathing copium everywhere, by telling his aide that the occupation would be temporary, and the Czech lands will remain autonomous, right? Wrong. On March 15th, 1939, the Germans took up occupation, and Czechoslovakia became the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Protectorate in quotes, because in reality, the Germans did no protecting whatsoever, and all kinds of persecuting. Jews were registered and deported, the Czech resistance was savagely suppressed, strikers were shot. And yet, it wasn't as bad in, let's say, Poland. The Germans believed the Czechs were Germanizable, so Czech women could marry German men, the Protectorate was allowed its own army, Hácha was kept on, and repressions weren't as bad. Until Heydrich showed up. Konstantin Neurath, official protector, was deemed too lenient by Hitler and fired, and Heydrich took his place. By 1942, there was a huge resistance movement. Many strikes, many acts of sabotage. Heydrich geniusly repressed it by simultaneously granting lots of concessions for key arms workers, working those same plants that could have been used to protect Czechoslovakia, while all the time savagely shooting, repressing and murdering strikers. And all the while, Hácha struck along for the ride. Although he did initially help the resistance a bit, maybe to sleep at night, he became increasingly sleepless in his sycophancy. In 1939, he had protested to Neurath against Germanization, and in October he refused to pledge allegiance to Hitler. He helped shelter resistance fighters, that November demanded, and got, the release of arrested university students, and then placed people such as Elias, a renowned German fighter, in the government. But in 1940, in response to the defeat of France, he didn't condemn the invasion. He condemned his own former republic for its, quote, false orientation of foreign policy. In 1941, following a vote in the Protectorate cabinet, he had the chance to resign, but didn't do so, and then not only gifted a luxury car to Heydrich, and condemned his assassination, but condemned the Beneš government as, quote, traitors. Yes, the people who had left the country, were working to mount a resistance, were, quote, traitors. He then did not only more traitoring himself, by praising the, quote, magnanimity of Adolf Hitler, but then accepted his own luxury car from Hitler, and continued to rubber stamp all Germany's abuses, from the deporting of Jews to the slaughter of his own people, and the massacre of the two villages. Hácha met an appropriate death for a slavish sycophant who hides his repulsiveness as resistance. He was unable to resist when, in May 1945, the resistance fighters and communist partisans rocked up. He was roughly escorted away by NKVD men, read beaten, treated interestingly in prison, read beat even harder, and then, wouldn't you know, out of nowhere, he was dead, trampled upon by the very people he'd trampled down, under the guise of shielding his people. All because he preferred dishonour to death, sycophancy to spirit, dusty drawing rooms to dignity and defiance, and thousands of Czechs paid for it with their lives.